Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Miranda. I am the commercial account manager for the Southeast with Ivanti. We are doing a presentation today with our partners, Network Consulting Services, to have a conversation regarding IT asset management. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Ivanti is a company that handles a number of different products. We started originally with endpoint management and patching. We have grown into security, service desk, asset management. I just want to give you a quick high level view of everything that we can do. We're not going to cover everything today. We're going to be focusing more on the asset management part of our portfolio. And doing that today, I'm going to have Bryan Hadzik. He is with Network Consulting Services. He's one of our partners and a phenomenal presenter. I'm going to be turning it over to him during the presentation. Please be interactive. If there are any questions or you want to know more, pipe up and let us know. Bryan?
All right. Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about asset management. This is a particularly interesting topic for me. I came from a certain kind of background that, I didn't really understand what asset management was. If you go and ask 5 people in IT, what is asset management, you're oftentimes going to find 5 different answers. It is a interesting and challenging problem that we have today. And I want to kind of break down what truly is asset management. Where does it come from? Do we follow any standards? Things like that. And then I want to actually show you what it looks like inside of our tool. What are kind of the value we can bring to the table with this Ivanti's asset management solution. So please, as we're going through this, stop, interrupt me, ask questions, just type it out in the chat there, and we'll answer them kind of as we go along here. All right, so today we're talking about asset management. Again, what is asset management? It's kind of a nebulous concept, a nebulous idea. So I came from a systems management background, and so I thought asset management was these 2 things, inventory and discovery. And that is finding things with discovery, like sweeping my network, going out and probing all the different IP addresses and finding what's out there. And then once we find something, doing an inventory of it, understanding what's going on with it, what's its serial number, information like that. And while that's true, those are a part of asset management. They're really not the whole picture. Those are, just like they sound, they're discovery and inventory. In order to get true asset management, if you look at a standards organization like the International Association of IT Asset Managers, what they say is it really is more all-encompassing than that. It's things like the life cycle. You've heard about the whole life cycle of the asset. Where did it come from? Where did it go? Who's it assigned to? Is it ready for disposal? All those kinds of things. Understanding what items are in stock. Stock is a very difficult thing to do from a discovery perspective because I cannot find a laptop that's sitting on the shelf unplugged. That's a very difficult thing for me to find on the network, so I need to understand how much that I have in stock. Purchasing, actually going and buying the assets, understanding what purchase order we used associated with it. What is the, do we own it? Do we lease it? Are we, paying it off over time? Things like that. Receiving those assets. Here's a really interesting trick that you can do to understand what the difference between asset management and, just discovery and inventory is. And that's, saying, hey, I found 500 laptops on the network, but, the accounting department says I purchased 600. What's the difference? Well, maybe I never received those 100. Did I actually get them from the manufacturer and bring them into my ecosystem? Asset request, if someone actually saying, hey, I need an asset. I want something from the ecosystem. This is really important because if we don't have good asset request, we can have further asset-related problems like hoarding. I'm a manager and an employee quit, and I take their laptop and I hold on to it because last time IT took me, 3 weeks to get my new employee a laptop. So this time I'm going to hoard it. And so, maybe we didn't have a good asset request process, so that trickle effect, is going to happen later on with causing other related problems. And then lastly, things like the financial. This is really what it's all about. Talk to any CIO, any CFO, any CEO, and say, well, do you guys have a strong asset management program? They want to have the answer to be yes. They're spending a lot of money on these assets. They can't just, be trusted with saying, hey, we spent $1 million on laptops last year. Yeah, they're probably all in good use. We need to understand that financial aspect associated with it. So all of those things are on the asset management side of the house. Now, we actually have a tool, our Neurons for IT Asset Management, is built on our enterprise service management platform that also has service management. So the common, ITIL related stuff, incident, problem, change, etc. We're not going to be really talking about that a lot today, but know that it's on the same platform. So you can kind of start with asset management and then go to service management, or never even go over to service management, or just do service management, whatever makes sense for your organization. But since they're built on the same platform, we've got some really cool tricks up our sleeves. We got things like, the CMDB. The CMDB is the configuration management database. We need one as a part of our change management program. That's what ITIL says. Well, the problem with ITIL is that if a device is not providing a service, it shouldn't be considered a CI, a configuration item inside of a CMDB. So what that means is something like a laptop that's sitting on a shelf that I have should not be in the CMDB. Well, me from an asset perspective, that's not good. I can't have that. I need to know about that asset. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that CMDB and we're going to give you two different perspectives. If you log in and you're someone that cares about change, you're going to see things like, the lockout window. You're going to see the service dependency map. What happens when you make a change to that particular asset. If you log in from an asset perspective, you see it from a different focus. You see things like, what is the warranty on that device? What is its serial number? Who is it? What location is it assigned to? But in reality, it's all the same database. So now you're not having to try and synchronize two separate systems. You'd have one single database that encompasses everything, and we just depend on how you look at it. So we got that cool trick up our sleeves from a CMDB perspective. But let's talk first a little bit more about what the mechanics of asset management are. What are some of the key times in the life cycle of we need to care about our devices and so forth. So let's clear off our whiteboard here. Let's talk about what your typical everyday asset looks like in your ecosystem. So I came from a systems management background. So I cared about inventorying my devices and patching them and pushing out software to them. And so in my brain, when I said, what is asset management, my life looked like this. This was the life cycle of my device. And essentially, it was something like this. When I plug it in, that's when it is born into the ecosystem. And when I unplug it, that's when it goes away. That's when it disappears from my ecosystem. But if you really think about it, the device exists quite a bit on the ends of this. This is not when it's actually created in our ecosystem. Let's think about it. What are all the steps that happen long before we actually plug it into the network? Well, first of all, we need to have a standard. What kind of device am I buying here? Do I just buy whatever random stuff is on sale, or do I have a standard for my organization that says this is the laptop we buy, this is the desktop we buy, things like that? Someone needs to actually request it. So a user in my organization needs to say, I need a laptop, or I need a desktop, or as part of our new hire process, we need to ask for those devices. Probably we need to purchase it. We need to create a PO to issue to the manufacturer to actually give us that particular product. We need to receive that, just like we said, make sure that all these POs that we're sending out to the manufacturers, that we're receiving that equipment on the other side. We need to put it in stock probably, because we don't buy one at a time usually. We're buying them in bulk, and we need to park them somewhere. And then we need to configure it for that user. We need to actually assign it to the user, and then it gets plugged into the network. And what happens during this life cycle is, it might go in this kind of circular fashion where it might go get reissued back out, put back in stock, and then, assigned to a user, and then that user actually uses it, and it might come back to us after a while. So it kind of sits there and goes through that circle. And then in the far end, we've got, okay, well, when we get it back, there's a whole pile of stuff that happens on the other end, right? I need to care about things like stock again. Maybe this user, perfectly good laptop, only a year old, I need to bring it back into stock to give it to another user. Maybe I need to worry about the warranty. I'm doing service work on it. I need to understand if it needs to be repaired or not. Or what about things like understanding the situation around depreciation? Maybe I'm leasing these laptops or buying them, or, I need to understand property tax associated with it, and then even things like disposal. I want to get rid of this particular device, and then I need to have a certificate of disposal to see kind of what's going on there. So this is truly what the life cycle of a device looks like. We have all this information that happens before we plug it in, and I'm exaggerating here. We're not plugging in every device, right? With Wi-Fi and work from home, et cetera. But you get the idea, when it comes online in my ecosystem. And then the same thing, all the stuff that happens kind of afterwards. Then we have in the middle kind of what we're doing with that, and it's in its active life cycle. And what we need to do as part of this is, when we talked about that discovery concept, in the middle here, we need to update that information with what the current status of it is. So, discovery, where's my discovery and inventory? I want to get discovery and inventory waking up and feeding into that system so I can do some comparisons. Like for example, here I assign it to Bob. Well, I want to discover and do an inventory of who's currently using it. What if Jim is using it? Well, now I've got what's called an asset exception. I think it's one way, but the real world is another way. And you're going to run into that problem a lot with asset management. It's not this magic, snap your fingers and your problems are solved kind of issue, because users are attached to these devices and they can cause lots of challenges associated with asset management. Like we've kind of already described, some of the things like hoarding or giving it to someone else or not returning our equipment or buying equipment outside of us. I can have all the best software in the world. The tool I'm going to show you today is great at asset management. Is it going to stop the head of the marketing driving down to the Apple store, swiping their credit card and buying 10 Macs and not telling us about it? That kind of problem is a process problem that we need to try and solve. That can't be solved with just a magic piece of software that goes and fixes that. So that's kind of the life cycle of our devices. I like to pose a question, a theoretical question to customers to say, when are devices born in your ecosystem? When are they created? When, that original kind of record, when does it come in? A lot of people say, well, yeah, right here, when it's plugged in, I want my discovery and inventory to pick it up. So SCCM or Active Directory or, something like that. Well, what's problematic with that is, what about all these things that happened before? What if I never received the device? We've got supply chain issues happening pretty badly right now. What if I placed the order and I paid for it, but then the product never even showed up? I can't wait for it to be created right here. So in reality, the best place to actually do it is right there. This is when we want the original record to be created, and that's at the actual time of purchase, when that PO is issued for that device. That way we can actually follow it through these first transitional stages before we actually even receive it on site. And if we ever never receive it, we want to kind of know about that. And then we can kind of keep that same record all the way through to the very end. So creating that record at the time of purchase is really the best case scenario for when that record is born into our ecosystem. A lot of times we want to do it here with discovery and inventory, but that's where I'm going to try and shy away and say, no, let's do it out at time of creation of that purchase order. Now, the problem is that the real world is so much more difficult than that. A lot of people who want to implement asset management, they are going to come back and say, well, yeah, that's a great theory and concept. Well, I don't have the purchase records from 3 years ago. They just don't exist. We changed accounting systems. I wasn't even here, whatever reason. That's okay. We have a lot of customers in that same problem as well. So we might need to use discovery and inventory to populate it initially, to populate our asset repository, but we don't want that to be the long-term permanent solution. We want to do it over here in the creation of those assets. All right, let's go jump over and talk about this a little bit more in action. So I am going to show you what the tool actually looks like today. And please ask any questions you have in the chat there, and I will try and review them as we go through. So let me switch over and show you the console here. So I am logged in currently as an asset administrator. Everything we do is role-based, so it controls what I see, how it works, what permissions that I have. You can see we have an administrator, an asset administrator, a configuration administrator, HR, facilities. Our service management, our enterprise service management platform is very broad, can do lots of different things. Obviously today we're talking about asset management, so I'm on the asset management or asset administrator role. If I go click on the home here, it's going to pull up my dashboards. This is just showing me some quick information. Show me my assets based on the type, or assets based on financial owner, assets based on their location up here. This is an interesting one, assets I haven't seen in 30 days. So this are things that have disappeared. What What does that mean? Well, if a laptop I have and someone steals the laptop or throws the laptop in the garbage, I don't get a nice courteous email that says, oh, by the way, this laptop has been stolen. I just have to know that I no longer am seeing it as part of the discovery process. And that might be good, or it might just be someone went on vacation for a long time. So those are some of the things that are going to indicate to you with our assets haven't seen over a certain amount of time. And our discovery information is going to help enrich our asset data that we have. We've got lots of different dashboards. You can see up here at the top, you as an administrator can help create these and change what the user's view looks like, but you can see I can jump through a bunch of them here and very easily represent the data. I like to look at it a couple of different ways, but I want to start with our standards catalog. So our standards catalog is, just like we were describing earlier, it is what your organization is going to buy as a standard. Now, you're probably not going to have as many as I do in here. You know, you might have 3 laptops, 3 desktops, some servers, you know, whatever, something like that. But here'd be an example of it. I have a laptop here. In this case, I have a Dell Latitude E5440. You can see that I have an external price and an internal price. Maybe I'm doing chargeback or showback or something like that. I want to indicate the cost of us configuring this device as well. You could see what its useful life is. In this case, it's a 60 months. 5 years I get out of this laptop. What about assets? How many of these assets do I have? In this case, I've got 21 of these out in the wild that I've got to worry about. How many do I have in stock? Oh, well, it looks like I've got one in my Colorado Springs office and one in my Sydney office. Well, that's not great. I want more. Let's go buy more. Oh, well, I probably shouldn't go and buy more because look at this. I currently have 2 active orders out there. I'm buying 15 of them through CDW and then another 5 of them from Dell. Again, I've got the supply chain issues that I'm struggling with, but now I understand that I've actually gone and placed those orders out there. What vendors can I buy it from? In this case, I can buy it from CDW for $1,600 or directly from the manufacturer Dell for $1,800. What if I can't get my hands on it? Should I have a suggested alternative? Oh yeah, well, we recommend you go get this HP 431 in case that we can't get the Dell Latitude E5540. So this is the standards catalog. This is what I hopefully have as, just like it sounds, the standard stuff that we buy in our organization. When I actually go to buy that, I would go up here to purchase orders. And let's go take a look at one that we've already created here, our POS terminals for the West expansion. Now, you probably already have a purchase order system, some kind of accounting system that makes POs. We're just going to ingest that data. So in this case, I've ingested that purchase order that came from the PO system. There's the purchase order number. I'm spending $100,000 up here in the top. And then down here at the bottom, we have our individual line items. And what's going to happen is when you open this up, do you see this little checkbox that we have right down here, down at the bottom, called Create Asset? This is very critical. Do you remember back at the whiteboard we were talking about how when that device is born and created into our ecosystem, this is what's doing that. It's creating the asset at time of purchase, creating a stub record. And that record that's a stub record, it is going to follow that asset all the way through its life cycle. But it's even created before the serial number exists. And if we go take a look at that, we can see here under assets, here are all of those assets that have been created for that. So most of them you can see are just empty and blank because we have not received them yet. We know that their status is on order. When we actually receive these, we can come in here and put the serial number. The serial number is our unique identifier in the database. We have both serialized assets and non-serialized assets. A serialized asset is something we care about at a serial number level, like a laptop, a desktop, a server, a switch, something I'm spending a significant amount of money on. A non-serialized asset we call consumables. Those would be things that you don't care about the individual unit. Keyboards and mice are great examples of that. You know what? It's a $9 keyboard. I don't care about it. I throw it in the trash when it doesn't work. I don't look at the individual serial number. So those would be tracked as consumables in our ecosystem so that we have a quantity. I've got 15 keyboards. I don't know which keyboards. I just have 15 and I'm just going to grab one and decrement that number. So here I would go and receive that, put in the serial number, maybe even have a barcode that I've scanned in our application supports barcode scanning, so it could have an asset tag or something like that associated with it. So now I can understand more about this particular asset and or this particular purchase and where it came from, and then all of this is tracked together. So now if we go and take a look at, for example, an employee, my favorite perspective to look at, you can go look at the devices, that's fine, but I like to look at it from a user perspective, because oftentimes that's what we're doing, right? You know, an employee leaves, and I've got to worry about all their assets they're leaving. So let's pull up my user record. You can see here, we've got an account for Bryan Hadzik, and then he has 10 assets associated with his account. You can see I've got an Office 365 subscription. I've got a Galaxy S phone, you know, some laptops and desktops, etc. Let's go take a look at this particular device and pull up the details on it. All right, so this individual hardware asset, it's telling me more about it. It's a Lenovo ThinkPad T460S. You can see that, you know, it's got a certain part number. It's got a serial number up here in the top. It's currently assigned to Bryan Hadzik in the North America, USA, Chicago office. It's in the status of assigned versus, you know, in stock or stolen or retired, things like that. You know, is it in production or test or dev? All of these forms that you're seeing here, you can customize. If you don't like, you know, this use policy or service level or things like that, no problem. We can go change it or even change these types, you know. Maybe the security risk is PCI because you do PCI compliance, or it's, you know, HIPAA if you have HIPAA related information. You get to choose what that looks like. You can see when I bought it, what its useful life is. In this case, this laptop I only get 36 months out of, and I'm 19 months into it. So now when the CFO comes in and asks that question, hey, what are your capital expenditures next year for replacement laptops? I can easily pull up a report because I can very easily tell you what devices are going to be going end of life. You can see I have the warranty information. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, great question. So what I'm showing you here today is our Ivanti neurons for ITAM. It supports both on-premise and in the cloud. So there are some reasons I would probably steer you towards going to the cloud. You know, not just having to worry about upgrades and servers and things like that. Plus, I'm going to talk a little bit later about some discovery aspects that we have that are only in the cloud. But it actually supports both. So whichever methodology you want to implement it, our product works both ways. And I'll call it out whenever there's a feature that only exists in the cloud version versus the on-premise version. All right, great question though. All right, so as we keep going here, we look at the warranty information. In this case, you know, 48 months worth of warranty. Tells me when that warranty expires. Let's go to the Discovery tab. This one's really, really important because everything on the previous tab is what it should be. I should have assigned it to Bryan Hadzik in the North America, USA, Chicago office. That's who's supposed to have it. Now we're going to compare that with our discovered values. Discovered values is what we actually found out in the real world. Now, what did we find in the real world? We found that Susie Davis in our Europe, Germany, Frankfurt office is actually using this particular laptop. Now, we need to know both of those values. We can't have Susie override Bryan as the assigned user because she was not the assigned user. It was Bryan. We just need to trigger what's called an asset exception. We know both of these values. We know they don't match. You can go look at it and determine what you need to do. Again, this is about a process. This is making it so that now you can call up Susie or Bryan and say, what's going on here? Why do you have the wrong laptop? We can't just magically fix this or magically reassign Susie to be the assigned user because that's not necessarily accurate. So we're going to pull in this information and do that assigned versus discovered comparison. How do we get this information? What's this discovery? Where does it come from? And things like that. That's a really interesting question. So we talked about that in here, that discovery and inventory is going to be part of, in the middle of the life cycle, keeping that asset nice and fresh so that we can understand whether it truly matches what we expect. So how do we discover? What would be the process for that? Well, you know, we've been doing discovery for a very long time. You've probably got a system out there, something like maybe SCCM, or, you know, the new name of it, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, or maybe you're using Intune. Its new name is Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Maybe you're using our own product, humorously also named Endpoint Manager, or maybe you're using Mobile Iron, or you've got VMware, maybe you have Rapid7 that does discovery for you. Most customers have lots of tools that find things. And whenever I start the conversation, I oftentimes ask them this: well, how many devices do you guys have? That's just kind of a typical, you know, thing for sizing, for pricing and things like that. And Most of the time my customers tell me this. Well, you know what? We've got Active Directory, and Active Directory says we have 700 devices. But when we do a Rapid7 scan, it says 900. But in SCCM, we only have 400. So that's my answer. 900, 400, and 700. And we don't know which one's right. Because none of these are ever accurate enough. They have information, and I care about their information, but it's kind of a mishmash, and we don't really trust any one of them. So what would happen if we just grabbed all these data sources and brought it in? Well, we would have lots of problems with things like duplication and the data being not very clean. So here's what I recommend. Let's add something called the Ivanti Neurons Discovery. Ivanti Neurons Discovery is going to use a connector to connect to all these various data sources and bring in its information. And what it does is it parks it into something called the data lake. And the data lake is a great way where we can deduplicate all of that, because think about it, you probably have a server that exists in Active Directory, inside of SCCM, and inside of VMware. Do you really want to have that show up 3 times? That's going to really throw off your asset management or CMDB project. So we're going to clean it up in the data lake. Then we're going to bring it up here and populate it in there. So the Ivanti Neurons Discovery Platform, again, it's an optional add-on, but I think it's really cool. And I'm going to show you a tiny bit about what that looks like today and where we got this information. So let me go and connect to that system really quick. Oh, let me do a quick CAPTCHA. Let me walk you through kind of what the discovery components would be. We use something called a connector, and a connector gives you the ability to connect to an alternative system. So it's not just our products, things like Amazon Web Services or CDW, CrowdStrike, Insight, Sharewell, Service Manager, Ivanti Pulse Profiler, Jamf, Microsoft 365, Azure, Azure Active Directory, Okta, OneLogon, Qualys, Rapid7, ServiceNow, VMware. All of these are very easy to set up. Let's go connect to VMware. How would I get all my servers? Maybe I'm a VMware shop. I want all my servers in the ecosystem. No problem. I come in here and say, okay, this is my vCenter connector. Here's my vCenter server, vCenter.virtualo.local. I'm going to ignore the cert warning because I don't have a cert installed on it. Here's my username. Here's my password. I want to every single day at 5:30 a.m. That's it. That's all I really need you to do, and I'm going to now suck in all of the data from VMware. And now my servers are going to be represented from a discovery perspective. And then next I'm going to do Intune, and that's going to grab all my phones. And then after that I'm going to do SCCM, et cetera. So this is a great way to pull in that data. And then also on top of that, we have our own agent, if you want to put it on there, to get some really cool real-time information. This is my favorite because it actually shows it in real time, down to even like the street level. If I kept zooming in here, if it's got GPS on and location services enabled, we'll eventually get down to, the individual street. And then you can even click on a device and get real-time information. We actually have a IoT protocol called MQTT. When I clicked on that, it went out and probed that device right then, right there. And I can see like CPU and memory and other asset-related information. And we can go and do other stuff, lots of cool stuff in Neurons. We've done a bunch of other videos on it we can send you that talk about our healing or patching that can be done in Neurons. Or as we're kind of showing here is the workspace and that edge intelligence of seeing what's going on with that device right now. What's its latency? What's its reliability index? Things like that. Or even doing a search up here like disk encryption. Go and actively ask all my devices what their status is with disk encryption. It did it right then, real time, right there. Well, why are all these red? Oh, well, I've got a bunch of machines here, and you can see they're using BitLocker, but they're currently set to a status of encrypted. No. Okay, well, let's go and worry about that. So that's where we populate from this discovery information, this import source and so forth. I love that Neurons Discovery because it gives us the ability to clean up those data sources before we go and bring it in. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to import the data directly, that's okay. We just got to worry about duplications and how we're going to manage those and so forth. So now I'm relating my assigned values versus discovered values on this page. I can go take a look at licensable software and software. So software is part of that discovery. I've got lots of different software installed in this machine, but I probably don't care about the majority of it. Let's go click on licensable software. What this does is we run it through our definitive software library. Let me tell you software you probably have to pay for. Think about things like Chrome and Firefox and things like that. You need to worry about them from an inventory and a patching perspective, but you're not paying a license for Google Chrome or Firefox. So we kind of try and avoid the noise with that and put it in a separate bucket and say, let's put licensable software, things that you probably have to pay a license for, into this bucket, and it gives you a little bit easier insight into it without having to sift through everything. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. We can understand things like our financial transactions associated with this. Do I own this laptop? Do we lease this laptop? How much did I pay for it? What about the vendor interactions? Whenever I have an interaction with, in this case, was it Lenovo, I can go and have a rating and say, did they communicate with me well? Did they solve my problems? Next time they come in and want to sell me another 500 laptops, I'm going to pull up their scorecard and say, hey, let's see how the team rates you, whether whether they like the interactions that they have from a customer service perspective or not. And now I have all that information there. All of the times that I have checked this in, checked this out, assigned it to users, that's going to show up in my inventory transaction log. That truly is the full life cycle of the device. Let's go take a look at stock management, and that's where I can understand what I have sitting on the shelf. So I've got a bunch of different stock rooms. Let's go take a look at our North America, USA, Colorado Springs stock room. Okay, so here I've got a bunch of different assets. I've got 1 laptop, 7 desktops, 2 consumables. Let's go take a look at those consumables. Oh, okay, yeah, here we have 14 Logitech mice. Again, I don't track them individually, I just track the quantity. And then maybe I want to set up a rule that says if we get less than 10 mice, trigger off an email to go and buy some more or something like that. So I can always have some on the shelf. Maybe I want to go and assign an individual asset. I could take this one off the shelf and give it to a user, and then all of those transactions are going to show up here. So just like we talked about, the entire paper trail, every single time we brought something into the stock room, we assigned it to a user, we took it out of the stock room, all of those times it's going to come and go, we're going to show up here.
Yeah. Real quick, interject again. We got another question in the chat.
Yep.
The question is, can you just do asset without service?
Yeah, great question. So we talked about how this platform is both it's our enterprise service management platform. So if I switch over to administrator, I'm going to see everything that the tool gives me the ability to do. And that is incident, problem, change, self-service, all of those different things. I can control what the users see. So here would be, a help desk technician running incident management and so forth. That's okay. If I don't want to use this because I only want to implement asset management, that's perfectly fine. We would just give them a different role, kind of how we talked about these roles up here. You just wouldn't see any of the things on the other side of the fence. But when eventually we get to that point and you want to do both, we've got some really cool ways that we can link over to our assets. So here I'm inside of a ticket, I'm having a particular problem with an asset, I could go link over to it. So we eventually benefit by doing both because then the asset side benefits from incident management information. When we go into negotiations with our printer vendor, let's pull up how many tickets that manufacturer is causing and compare it to our other manufacturers, and we can tell them if they're having a higher failure rate than others and things like that. So tying the two together gets it better in the long run, but absolutely not. At the start, you do not need to use both. You could just simply implement asset management. We can scoop up all the data that we talked about, and the other parts of the platform are just going to be essentially missing. They're just going to be invisible to those users. But great question. Okay, so we've gone over a lot of the basics. Let's talk about a couple of other things. We also can track, as you mature through this, it's going to get more interesting where you want to track things like invoices. So here's an actual invoice for a dollar amount that I would go and tie over to the purchase orders, or individual shipments. Maybe you're shipping a lot of things out directly to our users and you'd want to be able to track those shipment information. We have the ability to do that as well. All that information that we were kind of looking at earlier, you saw we can represent it in kind of a dashboard format here, but it's also very easy to just go and look at individual assets themselves. So I just click on a hardware asset up at the top, and then maybe I want to show a filter here. So let's look at all devices that are in production and that are a computer type and have a subtype of, I don't know, server or something like that. So now I filter it down to all my servers. I can then save this as a saved search, so it's very easy for me to pull this up in the future Just in this drop-down box right here, I've got it, servers or assets without purchase records or all of my assets, various things like that. So very easy to create filters and lists and search and turn those into reports for all of our reporting needs. One last thing I want to show you here is our contract management. So we have the ability to manage contracts, and those contracts can be things like a software contract. That's usually what people are looking at, but it could be as complicated as something like a lease for a building. That's another kind of a contract. So, here I've got my Office 365 contract that I have with Microsoft. We can go ahead and open that up. You can see I get individual line items here. In this case, it's a Office E365 E5 subscription. I can tell you more about the associated contract or what the termination details are, expiration dates, when we started that contract, who's in charge of it, is it active, maybe even have an attachment here if we actually went and signed a contract. So this gives you the ability to track individual contracts, and like I said, those contracts can be very broad, things like buildings and leases and things like that, or individual items like a Microsoft Office 365 subscription as an example. And so then you can go to those individual line items and see who that's assigned to, understand more about the way that the entitlements work. So you can see in this case, I have assigned this Office 365 subscription to this individual user. Now, a lot of customers are going to come back and say, hey, I want effective license position. Effective license position is something that is, the final answer that everyone's asking for. I bought a bunch of software, I've got a bunch of software installed, am I in compliance? That question is a lot harder than it sounds. So I always try to set everyone's expectations that, I don't think we're ever going to get to that point because of Microsoft introducing very strange licensing tactics like Office 365 lets you install it 5 times. Including on personal computers. So tracking that kind of information down is very rough. So I think of it more like an equation. You want to know A plus B equals C. Well, I can give you A, the number of licenses that you own. I can give you B, the number of installs that we have. But you need a human to kind of give it that last review to understand if it all equals C, because we have those kind of strange licensing things that are not just like the basic one-to-ones that we had in the past out there. So that's what we can do from a software asset management perspective. Okay, that was a quick run through of what the product looks like. I'm going to pause for a second and see, do we have any more questions that came up?
We do, Bryan. We have one more actually. It looks like it's kind of an important one. How do you implement this particular solution?
Good question. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, that this is a process more than it is just a tool. We've got a lot of other things in technology that are just tools. You just buy them and you turn them on and they solve problems right away. Asset management is a bigger struggle. We talked about that example of the head of marketing going down to the Apple store and swiping their credit card. How do you have software that prevents that? Well, you don't. We have a tool that can help implement a process, but ultimately it has to be that process. So what we recommend is we have a maturity model that we try and follow. Everything that I talked about here is relatively mature. If you start talking about tracking shipments and vendor scorecards and things like that, that's on the high end of maturity. Most organizations, they're kind of at that point where they're like, well, we got a bunch of spreadsheets and it's not looking good. Sorry, excuse me. They're living in the world of spreadsheets. So we've got to start with the basics. So we have a maturity model that we want you to follow that looks something kind of like this. Number one, step one, we come in and do a readiness workshop and look at your data. If you come back and say, hey, my objective is to have all this great information, all of this assets that I bought 3 years ago, and we come in and realize you don't even have the purchasing data on that, and everything's just in a spreadsheet, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So we've got to look at your data, we've got to understand what it looks like, and create a workshop on what the objectives of the project are going to be. Then step two, we actually go and implement it. We turn it on, we start importing data, we suck in from Active Directory, we kind of all do that implementation work. And then step three, we work on the standards catalog and stock management. We talked about those quite a bit today. So those are the foundational elements. Step 1, step 2, step 3, you kind of have to do them in that order. Once we get to step 3, though, we can kind of branch off and do whatever we want. Maybe you want to go to option 1, which is asset request. You want your users to come and ask you for a new piece of equipment. You want to have a great, dashboard where they can pick which laptops are available for them, for what rights that they have, things like that. Or number 2, the asset management procurement. Maybe you want to integrate with your purchase order system. I showed you creating a PO by hand. What if you create 100 or 500 a month? So I want to do that by hand. So let's talk about integrating it with your PO system automatically. And number 3, contract management. We kind of touched on that at the end. You want to understand more about contracts and get notifications when terminations are coming up and things like that. Plus a whole pile of add-ons. We can do a bunch of other stuff around, integrating with other systems and so forth. So this is how we recommend that you implement it, is following this, this maturity model. However, if we've sparked some interest today and you kind of like what you see, let's have a separate meeting, kind of a standalone, to understand more about what your exact business drivers are, and we can kind of go from there. So great question. That's how we implement it. I will throw out there that asset manager implementations usually drag on for quite a while. They don't take a huge amount of effort, but since we're involving other departments, oftentimes it gets slowed down quite a bit. So most customers come in, they're like, oh, well, it's a couple of weeks worth of work. We'll get it done in a month. Well, it ends up stretching out to 3 or 4 months. Same amount of effort, but just it always gets put on the back burner and pushed by other projects and things like that. And so just know that it oftentimes takes a couple of months before we actually turn it on and are actively using it. All right, great question. Okay, so that was a quick run through of our neurons for IT asset management from Ivanti today. I appreciate everyone attending and coming to our presentation here today. Like I said, this was just meant to be a quick high-level overview. If you want to have more specifics, definitely hit up and we can have a one-on-one presentation with you, kind of go over and understand your direct business challenges a little bit more if necessary. But so I'll pass it back over to you, Ed.
Thanks so much, Bryan. I really appreciate it. Fantastic demo. I hope everyone got something out of it. I want to thank everyone for making the time today to join us, hopefully have some good lunch and learn something. If there are any questions, please feel free to follow up with me directly. My contact information is right there. Network Consulting Services is a fantastic partner of Ivanti. We love working with them. They are their own repository of knowledge. They've helped us with a number of projects from implementation and delivery. So we'd like the opportunity to speak with you about asset management, or, if anything else came up that was of concern to you, let's have a conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it loose. I hope everyone had a good lunch and a good learn, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.